excited I am to be covering topics and the vein. And it's just so wonderful. And then how Spirit shows up and gives me experiences that kind of reinforce that topic. Well, the truth is, Spirit's always teaching me something. And I get excited about everything that I read each week in Science of Mind. It's like, I want to go further. I want to have more time to go deeper. There are very few pages in my textbook that don't have underlines, highlights, notes written in the margins. And just like you, I get to put these principles into practice every single day. I get to focus on them. I choose to focus on them. I get to test them. I get to prove the principles in one way or the other. And they never fail me. In that, I have total confidence and faith. And that's our overall theme for this month, Season of Faith. During the next 5 weeks, we'll be exploring new thought and new ways, starting with how the philosophy began, where it began, with whom it began, and how the early influences of new thought resulted in a number of individuals going against the religious norms of their time. They literally were spirits in rebellion. And they relied heavily on their own faith to stand up to the other religious influences of their era. They had to remain strong in their convictions to bring the various new thought beliefs into the American mainstream of religion. The one will focus primarily on his religious science and who the early influences were for Ernest Holmes, the founder. How he brought together the materials and the ideas that eventually became science of mind philosophy that we teach and practice today. For those of you who have taken science of mind classes or attended services on a regular basis, gone through some of the workshops, much of this material might be familiar to you. But maybe you'll pick up a new piece here and there. So, where do we start? Let me first say that if you want to study the history of new thought, one of the best books I can recommend is called Spirits in Rebellion. It's by Charles S. Braden, and it was published in 1963, just a few years before he made his transition in 1970. Mr. Braden was born in 1887, so he grew up in the midst of this new thought revolution, so to speak. And by the way, for those of you who attended the June 8th workshop on Ernest Holmes that was presented by Reverend Dr. Marilyn Leo, she had a similar background to Braden in that she grew up next door to Ernest Holmes, so she got to see religious science unfold as that unique branch of new thought. Back to Braden. He defined new thought as loosely used to cover a wide range of philosophical, theological, psychological, and practical approaches to God, to the world, to life, and its problems. One of the earliest groups was called the Metaphysical Club of Boston and was founded in 1895. Its founding statements included this as its purpose: to promote interest in and the practice of a true philosophy of life and happiness, to show that through right thinking, one's loftiest ideas may be brought into present realization, and to advance intelligent and systematic treatment of disease by spiritual and mental methods. This early group later defined metaphysical as new thought. They changed the name and detailed its purpose into specific bullet points of intent. First one being, mind is primary and causative, while matter is secondary and resulting. Thus we get cause and effect. Number two, we are all citizens. We are all children of God, or as they added later, spiritual citizens of the divine universe. I'm so excited to get to that phrase. Spiritual citizens of the divine universe. How cool is that? Number three, new thought was a method of healing bodily disease and social ills. Number four, New Thought was and is a philosophy of life. Number 5, there was no formal creed, but rather the practice they encouraged was through a scientific method, quote, of living a selfless life through union with a power that is love in action. Now, these early leaders differentiated old thought from new thought in that they said, new thought insists that the truth regarding life and its laws is to be found in man's inner consciousness, rather than in the study of phenomena. Man's real search is the discovery of his own soul. His own soul, your own soul, not someone else's, not comparing your journey to another person's, not judging your life or purpose or intelligence to that of your family or your friends or your fellow students. Such was the intent of New Thought when it first came into being. And in my belief, my perspective of science and mind, that is what it is still doing, what it can do for people who start studying it and embracing it. An article was published in the INTA, the International New Thought Alliance Bulletin, on December 15, 1916, that attempted to answer the question, what is New Thought? Have you ever had that question? Somebody asks you, what's New Thought? What's religious science? What's science of mind? How do you answer that? Their answer isn't any shorter than the one that I can come up with. This is what they wrote. First, as to what it is not. It is not a name of any fixed system of thought, philosophy, or religion. For when molded into a system, it ceases to be new thought. But some things can be said of it. New Thought practices in the 20th century what Jesus taught in the 1st century. So, for example, Jesus taught healing. New Thought practices healing. Jesus said, judge not. New Thought sees the good in others. Jesus said, take no anxious thought for tomorrow. New Thought practices divine supply. Jesus taught love and brotherhood. New Thought demonstrates unity and cooperation. Finally, the New Thought is the Christ thought made new, by being applied and proved in everyday affairs. New Thought is positive, constructive, a philosophy of optimism, the recognition, realization, and manifestation of God in man. And we've heard pieces of that through almost every talk. But let me repeat that last bit. New Thought is positive, constructive, a philosophy of optimism, the recognition, realization, and manifestation of God in man. And it continues to evolve as we become more aware and evolve. I must assume that since you're in this room, that this is the type of belief system that you want in your life, right? Yes? Okay. That you have faith in how this stuff works, how these principles work, this philosophy works for you, for your good. And that you believe or want to believe that God is expressing through you all the time. That's what I believe for sure, or I wouldn't be here. This works for me over and over and over again. And when I follow the principles, when I pay attention to my thoughts and my words, I can better direct the evolution of my life through the laws of mind. It's like the principles work better when I pay attention to them. Duh. It's when I don't pay attention that I get into trouble. How about you? And does it work the same for you? Of course. The universal laws and principles work the same for everyone. The variables are us, our humanness. The differences in what appears in our life, the results, are due to the amount of feelings or passion that we have for what we desire or choose to create. The differences are in the faith we have, in our intention, the power behind it, the words we choose, and the patterns of thinking that we express. If we, you and I, insist on thinking small, playing it safe for whatever reason, then our results will be small. That's the law. That's the way it is. It's mental equivalent. I've seen it. I've done it. Just to be clear, I'm not encouraging anyone to make reckless decisions or jump off a bridge without a bungee cord around your waist or a net below. What I'm saying is to think bigger. Believe in possibilities you don't see. To have faith in something greater than you. To make your creative source one of love. One of unlimited supply. One based on conviction for good. For and through God. I saw a tagline on an ad yesterday that said, "No challenge is too big for us." Isn't that great? No challenge is too big for us. Take that on as your own motto in life. God doesn't know size. If the early 20th century influences of New Thought had continued to stay small, to think limited thoughts, to shy away from the challenges of developing and creating the New Thought movement at that time, we might not be as far as we are today. We might not have this philosophy available to us. So who were some of those big thinkers? The obvious ones, the ones we learned about in our Exploring Roots class, which, by the way, you're the first to know, will begin on August 14th on Thursday nights. So if you've had foundations, you can start registering now. But these first thinkers, one of the first ones I want to talk about is Phineas Parkhurst Quimby. He lived 1802 to 1866. He is often considered the father or founder of the beliefs leading to the New Thought movement. He was an American spiritual teacher, philosopher, inventor, watchmaker, and healer. He practiced a healing technique called mesmerism and studied it for a few years until he became adept at administering the hypnotic technique to patients, who claimed to be cured and thus inspiring others to seek spiritual and mental healing. Patients of his included Julius and Annetta Dresser and Mary Baker Eddy. Quimby's claim to fame in the New Thought movement is primarily due to his success in mental healing. He taught that disease is rooted in mental cause and thus could be healed by changing your thinking. The next significant figure, Ralph Waldo Emerson. Any favorites? Emerson? Yeah, okay. 1803 to 1882, a 19th century American poet, very much involved in the Transcendentalist movement. For a while, he was a Unitarian minister like his father, and 5 generations before him, all the men were ministers. Emerson was a philosopher and the author of numerous essays and was a huge influence on Ernest Holmes. I love reading Emerson's works, once I learned how to do it without so much frustration. Because Emerson and Quimby lived during the same period, and both had such major influences on the New Thought movement, they are both referred to as either the father or grandfather of New Thought, depending on what materials you refer to. Another significant figure, Judge Thomas Troward, whose life spanned both the 19th and 20th centuries. After he retired from Her Majesty's service in being a judge in northern India, he spent the remainder, the last 20 years of his life, painting seascapes, writing and lecturing, primarily on metaphysical studies, what he called mental science. In our Roots course, we focus on one of his books, the Edinburgh and Dorr Lectures on Mental Science. Sounds like a heavy topic. He's even more challenging to read sometimes than Emerson. Troward provided New Thought with terms like first cause and effect. And he also taught about the impact that positive and negative thinking until the law of supply, as he called it, delivers to us that which we would like to create in our lives, to keep returning our thoughts to the universal mind. I don't know how many of you have a mind like me that kind of gets distracted every once in a while and loses focus. Yeah, absolutely. Another key figure, Emma Curtis Hopkins. She lived on this planet from 1849 to 1925, and her energy and influence continues to be felt today. Hopkins was initially a student of Mary Baker Eddy, who, as you may know, another significant spiritual rebel in history. Mary Baker Eddy was the founder of Christian Science, which was a forerunner to religious science. And Eddy also believed in spiritual healing, and as I mentioned, was a patient of Phineas Cooper's. Going back to Hopkins, who studied under Mary Baker Eddy and taught Christian Science until they had a separation. Hopkins taught the idea of a mother-father God. She is credited for being a key figure in helping to organize New Thought into a movement in the late 1800s based in Chicago. Emma Curtis Hopkins is often referred to as the teacher's teacher, or the mother of New Thought. Some of her students were Charles and Myrtle Fillmore, who started the Unity Church, Nona Brooks and Melinda Kramer, founders of Divine Science, Harriet Emily Cady, who wrote Unity's textbook, Lessons in Truth, and Hopkins taught Ernest Holmes, founder of religious science. Now, it's said that when Ernest Holmes would show up for his lesson with Emma Curtis Hopkins, he would be greeted at the door by a servant and led into the parlor where she would be sitting dressed in formal attire, sometimes wearing a hat, and he would sit down. And she would lecture for about an hour, and then he would be escorted back out the door. There was no Q&A session or discussion. She simply said what she was going to say. The student listened, learned, and left. It's also reported that Holmes was her last student. Now, isn't that an interesting connection? Hopkins was committed to her beliefs as a theologian, teacher, writer, feminist, and spiritual healer. She ordained hundreds of people through her theological seminary of Chicago, and she focused on training women as spiritual leaders. She was truly a rebellious spirit of her time. Of course, there are many, many more famous and not so famous people and authors who helped and continue to help the New Thought movement to grow. Wallace Wattles, Napoleon Hill, Emmett Fox, Joel Goldsmith, Wayne Dyer, Eckhart Tolle, Oprah, Deepak Chopra, and so forth. And I'm sure each one of us has our favorites. A movement as big as New Thought is made up of leaders and followers to create something as significant as a religion or spiritual philosophy. Each historic person or contribution adds to the whole, a bit here and a piece there. We today are part of tomorrow's history. Now, Ernest Holmes is credited as the founder of religious science, a branch of the New Thought movement. And he was not alone. He didn't have to make up this stuff. The laws and principles have been here since the beginning of man. So he collected the bits and the pieces. He studied and shared what he learned, and he wrote about it in what we now call the Science of Mind textbook, and from which we continue to teach and share and evolve. This is a practical spirituality, an optimistic way of living that we can apply to every part of our lives. Simple, not necessarily easy. It takes all of us learning, teaching, sharing, supporting one another through each challenge, celebrating our successes, and encouraging each other and ourselves in even greater ways to express more of who and what we are. A child of the divine, a spiritual citizen of the universe. The possibilities before us and inside us are unlimited and as individuals, as a group, as a collective consciousness. We are, each of us, bits and pieces of this thing called life. We're collected here together, attracted to one another consciously, and enjoy our time together on Sunday mornings as a church group, in our classes, perhaps socially. And those are amazing experiences to share. I love this church and this path. I recognize how also we're different in each stage of our own journey. Like little minnows swimming together in this big pool of energy. We can go off from the group at any time. We can change direction anytime we choose. Yet we have this unseen force that continues to connect us and unites us in oneness. So what should we create? What direction shall we go while we're traveling together? What type of experience do you want to have? Wondering what this is? This is a vision board. Maybe a little different than you've seen before. It's created by your board of trustees a couple years ago, and referred to in meetings from time to time. It's more of a vision timeline that focuses on the intended growth of this church, steps we would like to take as we move forward toward creating our own church facility or campus or other accomplishments that we want to create. Each pink sticky note declares words, goals, or ideas that the trustees wanted to see take place as we grow as a church. Because this vision board is set up in timeline fashion, and the sticky notes have been placed along where we consider it to be a reasonable time frame for that particular idea to come forward, for it to evolve. These are intentions. The notes are movable, and they can be accomplished slower or faster than we think they can. It's been lovingly reviewed and prayed over by me on a regular basis. But you know what? That's not enough. That's where you come in. Some of these things have already been accomplished. Those things on the far left, 2013, some in 2014. They're part of the PCCRS history. Yet there's so much more that hasn't been written down. The possibilities are unlimited. In the energy field of creation, in the mind of God, all of this is already done. We're just waiting for chronological time to tick-tock by. So what should we create? How big is your faith in our future? What fears are blocking you from fully participating? Where is your focus for the future of this church? I know where mine is. I know where some of the board members' attention is and their faith. They've written it down. What do you want to see manifest in this new thought church that we call PCCRS? And what can we do as a group to prove its principles, as Ernest Holmes has directed us to do? Please give some thought to it. And if you're moved to add to the timeline, we have all kinds of colors of sticky notes you can add. If you feel brave enough to add your name, that would be welcome too. Those spiritual rebels of the late 1800s banded together, loosely at first, didn't even know each other to begin with, and then in a more organized fashion. They developed and grew a consciousness that we now know as new thought, and in the case of this church organization, religious science. How should we carry it forward to express it more widely in the world? We can start by learning and practicing these universal principles in all our affairs. We can be more loving, more forgiving, more aware of the God nature of who we are. We can reach out to our families and our neighbors, do volunteer work, serve humanity, enjoy our job, or if you don't like it, change it. Do something that brings you joy and love and bliss. outrageous ideas. Nothing is too big for God. This can be a new way of expressing new thought about our church's future. There's a Cherokee wisdom that states, have a vision not clouded by fear. The only way new thought is going to continue to grow is if it expresses through us. And we become living role models and prove the laws and principles. New thought, when you examine the principles and teachings, is not all that new anyway, and can be found in most of the world's religions. Other belief systems have had thousands of years to spread their messages and teachings. New thought religions such as unity, divine science, Christian science, and religious science, it's only been around for a couple hundred years. But what a great time this is for all of us, to be part of it, to grow it, to direct it, to expand it, to be part of its evolution. Our teachers are many, both historical and contemporary, whether they have passed on to another dimension, are part of a different organization, or teach through all their books that they write. The materials from which we learn are vast and plentiful. How does one choose which book to read each week? There are so many. And then we have this thing called life experiences that are behind us or before us. And the distance and the direction is totally up to us. Spirits in rebellion are about making changes, about facing fears and discarding beliefs that no longer serve you. Spirits in rebellion are about leaving behind old patterns and paradigms and moving forward into a new experience or experiences with faith and trust and love. Our forefathers and mothers did it. We can do it too. Let's have a prayer. The practitioners, please come forward. And as the musicians take the stage again, the prayer chest is also coming forward. And again, you can meet with Yvonne, one of the practitioners, or put a prayer request form in the box after the service. The prayers that I use in closing are often from the Science of Mind textbook. And I do that so that you know there are prayers and meditations there that you can refer to on various topics. This one is also from the textbook. We now let go of everything and enter into contemplation of peace and good and truth and beauty. We are all conscious that God is all there is. There is nothing else. We are certain that the spirit of reality is our spirit, flows into our spirit and through our spirit. And we are conscious that love does guide and direct, lead, maintain, and sustain. We know that each one of us is a center of this divine life, in this perfect peace, this complete happiness, and this absolute wholeness. And we know that this perfection, which is the center of our very being, is projected into every atom of our being. Breathe that in. We know that the law of this being is perfect, and there is no obstruction to its operation. We know that the principles within us guides us, not only to the way of truth, but in the way and the performance of that knowledge. Whatever is for our benefit is already provided. I'm going to say that again. Whatever is for our benefit is already provided. It is all one thing. It is all one presence, operating through one fundamental law. Therefore, everything necessary to our well-being, whether we think of it as spiritual, mental, or physical, everything necessary to remove any belief in obstruction and the inflow and outpush of that spirit is brought into our experience. All good, all substance, all supply, all activity, all opportunity for self-expression is ours now. Amen and hallelujah. And so it is.